Mark Dubowitz is with us now, CEO of Defensive Democracies. He's got a new podcast, The Iranian Breakdown. We'll get to Iran and the modern history of Iran and the people's current plight for freedom. Mark, first off, on this, fast-moving talks. Obviously, no one's agreed yet. No one expected them to agree yet. But where do you think this process is from what we've learned now about what the Russian stance is on what they agreed on in Jeddah?
Well, look, I mean, we've got the Ukrainians who've agreed that they will embark on serious peace talks. You've got the Russians who are, Putin's playing that usual game where he doesn't say no, but it's sort of yes, but. And the yes, but is I want all concessions. I want to win. I want to retain Ukrainian land. I want to make sure that Ukraine is never part of NATO or part of the EU for that matter.
And Zelensky said, I want all our land back. You took it illegally. The invasion wasn't right. But what's practical? When do we get to the practical side? Or have you not seen that with Putin ever?
Well, I certainly haven't seen that yet. And I think it's got to be that President Trump, and I think he's doing that, has got to say to Vladimir Putin, look, you come to the table, we negotiate, or I'm going to start amping up the pressure, amping up the sanctions pressure, and I'm going to give the Ukrainian military what President Biden didn't give them so that they can inflict even more serious blows on the Russian military. Putin's got to understand he can get a lot of concessions at the negotiating table, but he can't get everything.
One thing is, I think the language is interesting. I'd like to thank President Trump for getting involved. And he said, partners. He used the term partners. That matters, doesn't it? I mean, I don't like Vladimir Putin. I think he's the Hitler of our generation. But if you're looking to move forward, you use those words.
Yeah, but listen, Putin's a skilled diplomat. He's been around the block many times. He understands also how to appeal to President Trump, and he understands how to win at the negotiating table, even though he's been losing on the battlefield for a number of years against, I think, brave Ukrainian soldiers. But
hundreds of thousands.
This
has been a humiliation for him, don't you think? Or is he incapable of understanding how bad his people proportionally are doing?
Look, unfortunately, Brian, I mean, the Russians have the way they win militarily, that they've done this over centuries, is they just throw more and more and more young bodies at the fight in a grinding war of attrition. And he knows at the end of the day, he's got more people to throw into the fight than Zelensky does. So he will continue to grind his people, both economically, militarily, and huge cost of lives.
But the bigger army doesn't always win.
Not always win, absolutely. And look, the Ukrainians have fought bravely. I think from a U.S. perspective, I mean, we have to understand, we have spent 3.5 cents on the dollar of our military budget to take out a significant part of our second most dangerous enemy without one American troop on the ground, without one American life being lost. I mean, that is got to be the model for the 21st century, where our allies fight and die in their own defense against our enemies, against this axis of aggressors that is aligned against us.
So the president put this out a couple of days ago, is I can do things financially to the Russians that are very, very, very bad for them. And to kind of say, you better look sincere when asked, are they going to sincerely try to bring peace? And then General Keane thought that this is an underreported portion of what Trump did, cut 18.
On March the 12th, the Trump team has removed the exemptions that were permitting the EU and others to sell oil, to buy Russian oil. And that is absolutely significant. This has been quietly done, but Putin certainly is aware of that. And it just goes to show you that the Trump team is going to play tough with Putin and at the same time talk nice to him publicly.
You were nodding.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. General Keene's got it. I mean, there were these exemptions that allowed the Russians to sell oil to the Europeans. And of course, I mean, Russia is a one commodity country, right? All they got is oil. So this has allowed them to stay afloat economically, despite the significant sanctions that were imposed on them. So I think this is a great move by President Trump. So that's right. Talk nice publicly, but coercive diplomacy is about coercion. And the United States needs to have leverage against one of the most wily and deadly dictators on the planet.
Today, and we'll see what happens, because Vladimir Putin did speak to President Trump yesterday, and they're going to speak again today. And we'll see where this goes. This is a ceasefire. One thing that the Putin wants is what happens in Kursk. And he said, do they stay? Because that's a portion of Moscow. And then Trump this morning said right now the Ukrainian forces are surrounded in Kursk, and that he personally told Vladimir Putin, let him go. So if he means let him go, does that mean get out of the country? That would be the one bargaining chip that he had. So it's going to be complex. But if his goal, president's goal, is to stop the fighting, do you have a problem when he says enough killing, enough fighting? You study war. Do you think that no one wants to die in war, but do you think we should be using that language?
Look, President Trump's right. I mean, it's been a grinding war. There have been hundreds of thousands of casualties, and the war has to be brought to an end. But, we also have to recognize who is our ally and who is our adversary. And we have to make sure that we back our allies. If we don't back the Ukrainians, then we're not going to back the Israelis or the Taiwanese or the Koreans. And at some point, when we send a message around the world that we don't have your back, the United States should be, we're no greater friend and we're no worse adversary, right? I mean, you don't want us as an enemy, but you want us as a friend. I would be cautious about sending the opposite message. And so I think we need to back the Ukrainians, but we need to bring this to a resolution, and we need to do so with coercion.
Today, we understand, or it was yesterday, depending on the time change, in Beijing, Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia are meeting about nuclear talks. I don't know if they're trying to talk Iran off a ledge, or they also had military exercises this week. How significant is this alliance? What's your read?
Well, the alliance is significant. I mean, there really is an axis of aggressors. It is China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. They have aligned. They're cooperating militarily, politically, economically, diplomatically against the United States, against our allies, against our interests. Right? We have to recognize that there is this axis out there. And then the question is, what do we do with members of the axis? So maybe on Russia, maybe the Trump administration can successfully flip the Russians against the Chinese and Iranians. Maybe. I'm skeptical. Maybe it's worth a try.
I'm more than skeptical.
Right. I think we should be. But that's what they're going to try to do. With the Chinese, this is a multi-generational struggle. We need to counter the Chinese Communist Party, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. The North Koreans already have nuclear weapons and ICBMs. It's a problem from hell. All we can do is make sure they don't invade Seoul and take over South Korea. But I think actually the Iranians are the weakest element of the axis. I think there we have an opportunity to do something significant. The Israelis have inflicted massive blows against the Iranian axis over the past 12 months. I think we need to back the Israelis, but we also have to understand Iran is poised to develop nuclear weapons. We need to have a plan diplomatically and militarily.
So right now, when you talk about, we have a window open, because if the reporting's true, and I would believe you, Mark, because with the Defense of Democracy, you've got best intelligence, but they did some damage to the missile defense system, the S-400 missile defense system, and they also did some damage to the nuclear program. So are either of those things true, and is it still the case right now?
Oh, yeah, the Israelis inflicted significant damage. I mean, they took out all of Iran's strategic air defenses. They reduced their ballistic missile production capability by like 93%. I mean, the skies are open. The Ayatollah is naked. And
no Syria?
And right, Assad's gone down. Hezbollah has been severely degraded. Hamas has been effectively destroyed as a military organization. The Israelis have done all of this in a year and a half. Again, if we have an ally willing to fight and die in our own defense against the common enemy, right, that's the model we want. And I think the Israelis are well poised to take out the rest of Iran's nuclear program. But President Trump's going to try to do it diplomatically. He sent a letter to Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader. Well, we'll see what happens. Khamenei came back and said, well, it went terrible in the sense Khamenei said, no, we're not interested. But he needs to understand, the Supreme Leader needs to understand that we either dismantle his nuclear program peacefully, or President Trump's going to green light the Israelis to take it out militarily.
People have told me, too, in 40 years, we've never been this close to being able to take down to size our enemy in the region, who is an enemy in the region to all the people that we're allied to, whether it's UAE or Saudi Arabia or Jordan. No one likes them. Turkey, I guess, perhaps, which is a dicey nation. So do we let that window pass in terms of promise about of a year of talks where they do certain things to maybe de-emphasize their nuclear program?
Yeah, well, that's the game that the regime is going to play with us. They're going to try rope-a-dope President Trump the way they've rope-a-doped multiple U.S. presidents, extend the diplomacy, kick the can down the road, do some kind of deal like Obama did in 2015, hundreds of billions of dollars of sanctions relief, terrible deal.
Would have expired by now.
Would have expired, exactly right. And you'd have Iran today with a internationally recognized, quote, legitimate nuclear weapons program and about $1 trillion in sanctions relief. President Trump is smart enough not to do that. President Trump understands he needs to dismantle the program. He doesn't want to do the Obama deal of 2015.
We don't want an alliance where Russia says an attack on one is an attack on all. Because if Israel goes ahead and takes out their program, Russia's going to be treaty obligated to do what we're doing in NATO. What would stop that? They could mount it today. Would that change our posture?
Well, it might be those threats, but they may be hollow threats. But at the end of the day, I don't think the Russians
We'd ignore it?
I don't think Russians want to go to war to defend an Iranian nuclear weapons program. I don't think the Chinese either. I think at the end of the day, what we need to be skeptical of is this idea that Russia's going to be on our side negotiating with the Iranians. The Russians in 2015 were Iran's lawyer.
That's the most ridiculous statement ever.
Right.
Because they offered that. Vladimir Putin says, hey, why don't I talk to Iran for you?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They did that in 2015, and the Russians were on the Iranian side of the table, and they negotiated a great deal for Iran, not for the United States. I'm skeptical that you will get the Russians to be on our side with respect to Iran. The partnership is deep. The military ties are very close. The Iranians are providing drones and missiles to Russians to kill Ukrainians.
That was a game changer.
Game changer.
They were running out of equipment.
That's right. That's right. And in terms of that, and then the North Koreans were providing soldiers to the Russians.
Which is crazy.
To fight the
North
Ukrainians.
Koreans fighting against the Ukrainians. By the way, terrible fighters. That really know what they're basically cannon fodder too, correct?
That's right.
What do you think the South Koreans take away from that?
Well, I think they take away, a few things. One is, are we going to be protected from the United States? Is the United States going to extend its military and nuclear umbrella over us? We have that theoretically, but if I were South Korea today, and frankly, if I were Taiwan today, Germany today, Ukraine today, I'd be thinking, I need my own nuclear weapons capability. My biggest fear is that if Iran gets nuclear weapons capability, the rest of these countries will develop their own nuclear weapons capability. We'll have nuclear proliferation through the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East, and Europe. And that's going to be a really dangerous world.
But
Brian.
guess who doesn't want that? China. China doesn't want that. So how do you use that to maybe China acquiesce? For example, if South Korea and Japan get nuclear weapons, what are they going to do?
No, that's exactly right.
That'll be a non-starter for them, just like we believe it's a non-starter of North Korea, but we let North Korea get weapons.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, that's got to be the threat to these to China, to Russia, and to the Iranians. And at the end of the day, your adversaries are going to end up with nuclear weapons, right? And so you've got to stop proliferation. You got to work with us. Maybe that's the only chance.
And here's the danger that we have. It's our capabilities in reality right now. In honest testimony from the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Adrian Spain, this week, Cut 25.
It is also a fact that today's airmen will do so with the oldest airplanes, the smallest force, and with fewer monthly flying hours than at any point in our history. Airmen have and always will get the job done, but today they do so at elevated risk. Meanwhile, China's military forces are expanding and modernizing. Their nuclear modernization, long-range missile proliferation, and recent test flights of 2 6th-gen aircraft is simply further evidence of the elevated threat in this strategic environment.
You want to challenge anything he said?
I don't. And I think he's exactly right. I mean, it's one thing for us to go out to our allies and say you got to spend more militarily. It's exactly right. President Trump is saying that, and he's getting results. It's another thing is the Pentagon also needs to spend wisely, efficiently, effectively. But we can't be going into this new reality in the 21st century with the smallest Air Force, the smallest Navy, and fighting men who don't have the equipment in order to protect themselves.
So the people driving in their car right now listening to us say, wait a second, how much more money do we have to give them? We give them $800 billion a year. It's the thing. It's the largest expenditures. For some reason, Republicans are the only ones who want to spend for, and that's a give and take with Democrats. I don't know how that happened, but we're almost giving them $1 trillion. Like, how much more money? Now, in percentage to the GDP, we could do more, but don't you think they should be doing more with the money they have?
Well, listen, absolutely. I mean, I think it's exactly right what Elon Musk is doing with Doge, is going in there and saying, at the end of the day, we have to spend less to produce better results. But going in with a chainsaw in the Pentagon and just gutting the Pentagon is not the right thing
education.
to do. Well, we need to go in there with a scalpel, right? We need to figure out, and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, is doing this with his team. How are we spending the money? How can we do it more effectively? Do we need these massive platforms that are multi-year, multi-$100 billion platforms? Or can we be using next-generation drones, next-generation systems that are more versatile, more cost-effective, but equally deadly against our enemies, right? And I think there are companies out there right now who are not the sort of standard defense contractors, but now innovative defense contractors coming out of Silicon Valley, who are developing this kind of technology.
And I'll let you go after this. Silicon Valley was not cooperating 10 years ago.
Correct.
Now they're all in.
They're all in.
That's awesome.
Yep. If we can bring Silicon Valley innovation to protect our war fighters. And you're exactly right. For decades, they weren't all in ideologically. That's changing, Brian. And I think if we can bring their innovation and effectiveness, we will be the most deadly, most efficient military on earth. And we need to do that for the 21st century.
Mark Dubowitz, CEO of Defense of Democracies. Thanks for coming in studio. Great to see you.
Yeah, wonderful, Brian. Thank you.
Back in a moment.